What's up? How y'all doing? It's Liquormonger. This one is the Benchmade 201 Activator from Snody. It's got a D2 3.6 inch blade. It's 0.14 inches thick. Overall 0.1 inches, 5 ounces. It's got a winewood handle. This is a fantastically designed knife. It's very utilitarian. You can see here it's got just a single, very large finger choil, very large finger groove. I'm not even sure if you want to call that a choil. The jimping is interestingly placed. Now, it may seem counterintuitive. The placement for the jimping on this knife is very far forward. So if you have a standard cutting grip, standard grip, it's not in the correct position. It needs to be further back. You have to put your thumb way too far forward. However, this knife is designed, I think, primarily as a light utility blade, carving, just a little bit heavier cutting tasks than a traditional EDC. And for that, these serrations are in the perfect spot, just to give an extra amount of leverage. You can see the recurve on this blade design here. So when you're actually using that recurve and you have whatever material you're carving on, in that section of the blade, that front section of the blade, the jimping here for both your thumbs, you can just deliver an excellent controlled pressure, give a very controlled cut. It's just a very intuitive knife. It lends itself to being used quite easily. You can see the handle here is very thin. There's not a whole lot of grip per se. It is quite slick, but it's not something you're going to be wanting to use for a defensive task anyway. The drop point on the blade does lead to a little bit of a shallower point. If I can get that to come in here, it's not the thickest tip, but being D2 and being as thick as it is, I'm not concerned about that. I do think that that's going to withstand some very good, very heavy abuse. It's not a full flat grind on the blade, but it has such a large profile with the grind being so high that it has the edge geometry of something like with a full flat grind or a feather ground blade. It just comes very shallow right there behind that relief bevel, so it's very easy to get a very keen edge on this knife. The D2 keeps it obviously well. Benchmade does an amazing job with their DT. You can see that Snody designation here. I like the way that the actual curve here for the grind is kind of swept up and it curves in. It follows that recurve design. You can see that there. It's not a straight line. It's just a little bit of nice aesthetic. As well as the milling that they've actually done on this wine wood. The wood is beautiful. It's one of the reasons I like this knife so much. That in I don't know, compilation, whatever, with this actual sheath here, I'm a big fan of this sheath. I really like the way that it's designed. The retention is fantastic. It hangs from my hip in the correct position. As you can see, it's kind of a reddish natural tan leather, and then the red winewood handles. It just looks fantastic with the brass button. I actually use this more for weekend carry, dress carry. If I'm wearing slacks and a button-up shirt, I don't want to look like a bum. This is probably going to be what I'm carrying. Something like this is what I'm going to put on. It's just a less intimidating knife. It's a little bit smaller, so it doesn't draw as much attention, but at the same time, you still have a massive amount of utility. And I don't feel unarmed with this knife. This isn't something that I'm going to go for defense primarily. First off, if I had a choice, but if I do have this knife over something like majority of the folding knives I own, I'm not going to feel unarmed. So for that, I am just a big fan of this knife. You can see the lanyard hole. They've plugged a little lanyard hole into the back, goes straight through the scales. It is a full tang blade all the way around. It is not skeletonized. Torx head screws. Those are Torx 10 screws. Let you get a good look at this wood here. Very pretty wood. You can see the way they've done that milling up at the top. And the jimping is not aggressive, but it is very purposeful. Like I mentioned, this isn't something you're going to want to do extended work with for an extreme period of time. You're not, carving a spoon. This probably isn't going to be the one that you want. It's going to leave some hot spots. Your hand's going to be rubbed raw, but for shorter tasks, just, removing a knot, things like that, this jimping is just in the perfect position. It just works so well. Slash cutting, any sort of loose material, that little bit of recurve on the blade there isn't, it's not going to work like our traditional recurve, as in catching material. Material is just going to slip over this belly here, but it's still going to work with a little bit of retention, maintain a little bit of extra cutting ability for that blade. I imagine this would actually be a fantastic skinner. Again, I'm not into hunting too much. I don't have any experience doing that, but looking at this design here, I imagine it would suit that task quite well. Don't quite know what else to say about it. Stone wash is beautiful. I really do like that stone wash. This isn't something I use for hard tasks. Like I say, this is just something I put on the weekends to look pretty. It is discontinued. I believe, don't quote me on this one, but I believe they discontinued this in 2013. Might have been 2014, but it is no longer made. You can find them online, forums, eBay, things like that. Generally, I believe the MSRP was $165. Again, don't quote me on that. What looks about most of the list pricing I see now is about $150, which is a little bit high, but if you want it, it's definitely worth it. This is the Snody 201 Activator from Benchmade, full size. Y'all have a good one.